At first glance, it looked like the ultimate modern royal fairy tale, the kind of story people love to believe in. A glowing duchess stepping into the spotlight, a gentle hand resting protectively on her baby bump, shy smiles exchanged with flashing cameras. It felt symbolic, like the monarchy was finally entering a new, softer era. The public was ready to celebrate, the media was ready to praise, and the narrative seemed perfectly set. Everything about the image said happiness, hope, and progress. For a moment, the world collectively agreed to suspend doubt and simply enjoy the picture being presented. But almost immediately, something about that picture began to feel slightly off. Not enough to cause outrage or scandal, not enough to trigger headlines, but enough to create a quiet sense of unease. It wasn't a single moment or a dramatic revelation. It was more like a slow flicker in the background, a growing feeling that what people were seeing didn't quite line up with what they were being told. Royal watchers, who usually focus on dresses, etiquette, and charity appearances, started noticing details that didn't fit. And once noticed, those details refused to disappear. At first, the questions were whispered. A photo shared online, a short video clip replayed again and again. A comment asking, "Is it just me, or does something look strange?" These weren't accusations, at least not in the beginning. They were expressions of confusion. But as more images surfaced, those whispers began to snowball. What started as casual observation turned into one of the most controversial and tightly controlled discussions in modern royal history. This wasn't about unflattering angles or bad lighting. People were talking about physical inconsistencies, timeline contradictions, and secrecy that felt excessive even by royal standards. The strange part was that none of this came from leaks or insider gossip. It came from public appearances. The pregnancy itself became the center of attention. Royal duty relies heavily on visibility, and Meghan's pregnancy was no exception. Cameras followed her everywhere, and naturally, people began to notice changes. In some appearances, the baby bump looked high, firm, and very advanced, almost as if she were well into the final trimester. Yet just days later, in a different outfit or setting, the bump appeared noticeably smaller, flatter, or shaped differently. Initially, supporters were quick to explain it away. Clothing can change how a body looks. Posture matters, lighting matters, pregnancy itself isn't static. These explanations sounded reasonable, and many people were happy to give her the benefit of the doubt. But then the movement became part of the conversation. In one widely shared clip, Meghan was seen squatting down to pet a dog, knees together, then standing back up with ease. For women who have experienced late pregnancy, this moment stood out. Balance changes, mobility changes. Movements like that are usually slow and careful, not fluid and effortless. It wasn't just that one moment. There were other clips where the bump appeared to move independently, to compress or fold in ways that didn't seem natural. In some images, it even appeared oddly angular or square. The internet didn't react with instant judgment, but with documentation. Screenshots were compared, photos were placed side by side. People asked how someone could appear nearly full-term one day, and several months earlier the next. The visual narrative seemed to glitch, and instead of addressing the growing confusion, the response was increased privacy and tighter control. At the same time, another carefully crafted story was being promoted, this time about the birth itself. Meghan and Harry made it clear that they wanted to do things differently. This wasn't going to be a traditional royal birth, with staged photos on hospital steps. Instead, the public was told to expect a peaceful home birth at Frogmore Cottage. The story included doulas, calm energy, and a holistic environment far away from intrusive cameras. It fit perfectly with the image of a modern woman reclaiming control over her body and rejecting rigid royal traditions. Many people found the idea empowering and refreshing. Then, almost overnight, that narrative vanished. On the day of the birth, Meghan was reportedly taken to the Portland Hospital in London, a private and highly secure medical facility. In itself, this shouldn't have been controversial. Birth plans change, and medical needs always come first. The real issue wasn't the hospital, it was how the change was handled. There was no announcement, no explanation, no acknowledgement that the previously promoted home birth plan had been abandoned. The story the public had been encouraged to believe was simply erased. What made this even more unsettling was the level of secrecy surrounding the hospital visit. Reports suggested that even senior members of the royal family weren't informed until after the birth had already taken place. That raised eyebrows. If everything was straightforward, why the cloak and dagger approach? At that point, many people felt it went beyond privacy and into deliberate narrative control. When information is managed that tightly, it naturally leads to speculation about what's being hidden. The confusion reached its peak with the official birth announcement. Buckingham Palace released a statement saying Meghan had gone into labor. The media sprang into action, reporters rushed to their positions, and the world waited for updates. But later it emerged that Archie had already been born hours before that announcement was made. By the time the statement went out, Meghan, Harry, and the baby were reportedly already back at home. This wasn't a small miscommunication. It was a direct contradiction of events. That discrepancy poured fuel on already smoldering rumors. People began to ask why an announcement about labor would be released after the birth had already happened. To skeptics, it looked like a pre-planned media rollout that had slipped out of sync with reality. Those missing hours between the birth and the announcement became the focus of intense speculation. If the timeline couldn't be trusted, then what else might be inaccurate? That question lingered long after the excitement faded. In the aftermath, the narrative shifted yet again. This time, the focus moved from the birth to Meghan's emotional experience during pregnancy. In her interview with Oprah, she painted a picture of deep isolation and despair. She described feeling unprotected, ignored, and pushed to the brink while palace officials allegedly turned their backs on her. The story was heartbreaking, and it had a powerful impact. Public sympathy swung sharply in her favor, and the monarchy faced intense criticism. However, as time passed, another side of the story began to surface. Reports of internal emails, schedules, and staff accounts suggested a very different environment behind the scenes. Rather than neglect, these accounts described chaos. Staff members allegedly scrambling to meet last-minute demands, canceling prior commitments, and working under extreme pressure. Far from being ignored, Meghan appeared to be at the center of constant activity. The nickname Duchess Difficult didn't emerge in a vacuum. It reflected the exhaustion of staff who claimed they were being pushed beyond reasonable limits. If these accounts are accurate, they reveal a stark contradiction. It's difficult to reconcile the image of a woman, completely abandoned by the institution, with one who had teams constantly rearranging their lives around her needs. This contradiction led some to question whether the isolation narrative was less about reality and more about framing their departure from royal life. The idea that victimhood was being used as justification became harder to ignore. One of the most vocal critics of this narrative was Piers Morgan. While much of the American media treated Meghan's claims with sympathy, Morgan took a far more aggressive stance. He argued that Meghan and Harry strategically used pregnancy and motherhood as a shield against criticism. According to him, any scrutiny of their behavior was reframed as an attack on a vulnerable woman and her child. This, he claimed, made genuine accountability almost impossible. Morgan also suggested that multiple versions of the birth announcement were prepared in advance, implying a calculated approach to managing public perception. If true, it would mean that the confusion surrounding the birth wasn't accidental but intentional. Confusion weakens reporting, and weak reporting allows those controlling the narrative to accuse the media of misinformation. It's a cycle that benefits the person at the center of the story. The Oprah interview, when revisited with this context, began to feel different to some viewers. What initially seemed raw and spontaneous started to look carefully structured. Critics pointed to controlled pauses, perfectly timed emotional moments, and carefully worded statements that implied wrongdoing without offering specifics. As an actress, Meghan knows how to convey vulnerability. But critics argued there's a difference between experiencing emotion and performing it for the camera. Perhaps the most striking element of the entire saga is the silence surrounding the most damaging rumors. Harry and Meghan are no strangers to legal action. They have sued media outlets over letters, photos, and privacy breaches. They have fought aggressively to protect their image. Yet when it comes to surrogacy theories and fake pregnancy allegations, they have remained silent. No lawsuits, no definitive statements, no medical proof released to end the speculation. In the court of public opinion, silence can be interpreted in many ways. Some see it as dignity, others see it as avoidance. When minor issues are met with legal firepower but major allegations are ignored, people naturally wonder why. Taking such claims to court would invite legal discovery, a process that demands evidence under oath. For some, the choice to remain silent suggests that engaging legally could reveal more than they're willing to show. In the end, this story isn't really about whether a baby bump was real or fake, or whether a birth happened at home or in a hospital. It's about trust. Meghan and Harry built their brand on authenticity, truth, and transparency, but credibility is fragile. Every edited image, every altered timeline, and every unexplained contradiction chips away at it. Many people didn't turn against them out of hatred or prejudice. They turned away because they felt manipulated, told not to trust their own eyes or ask reasonable questions. As time has gone on, that shadow has not faded. If anything, it has grown longer and more defined. Every new interview, every podcast appearance, every carefully produced documentary is now viewed through the same lens of skepticism. People no longer listen only to what is being said, they measure it against what was said before. They compare timelines, revisit old footage, and reanalyze past statements. In a digital age where nothing truly disappears, earlier inconsistencies are constantly resurfaced, stitched together, and shared with new audiences who are discovering the controversy for the first time. What makes this situation even more complicated is the couple's ongoing effort to position themselves as victims of misinformation, while simultaneously being heavy users of media themselves. They condemn the press for intrusion, yet rely on interviews, streaming platforms, and controlled storytelling to shape public opinion. This contradiction has not gone unnoticed. To many observers, it feels less like a fight for privacy and more like a fight for narrative dominance. The issue isn't that they speak out, it's that they want to speak without being questioned. Another layer to this story is how criticism is often reframed. Those who ask questions are frequently labeled as hateful, biased, or malicious. While genuine harassment absolutely exists and should be condemned, lumping all skepticism into that category has had a chilling effect on honest discussion. Reasonable questions about timelines, procedures, and public statements are dismissed as cruelty. This tactic may silence some voices, but it also alienates others who feel unfairly accused simply for noticing contradictions. The long-term impact of this approach is erosion of goodwill. Sympathy has a shelf life, especially when it is repeatedly invoked without accountability. Many people initially empathized deeply with Meghan's struggles and Harry's desire to protect his family. But empathy can turn into fatigue when every challenge is framed as persecution, and every doubt is treated as an attack. Over time, the emotional appeal loses its power, and people start craving clarity instead. What's particularly striking is how this saga has overshadowed opportunities for genuine connection. Meghan and Harry had a rare chance to redefine modern royalty in a way that balanced transparency with dignity. Instead, the constant need to control perception has kept them locked in a defensive posture. Rather than letting actions speak over time, they've repeatedly returned to the microphone, reopening old wounds and reigniting old debates. Each return invites scrutiny, not less of it. In many ways, this entire controversy serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of image management. You can curate photos, control interviews, and restrict access, but you can't permanently override collective memory. People notice patterns, they remember inconsistencies. And when answers aren't provided, speculation fills the gap. Silence doesn't erase doubt, it gives it space to grow. Ultimately, the question that lingers isn't whether every rumor is true. It's why so many questions remain unanswered years later. Trust is rebuilt through consistency, not through repetition of the same emotional appeals. Until the gaps in the story are addressed directly and transparently, skepticism will continue to follow them. In the end, fame can amplify a voice, but it can't force belief. And once doubt becomes part of the public narrative, it's nearly impossible to remove. The so-called moon bump saga is just a symptom of a larger issue: the belief that reality itself can be curated and controlled indefinitely. But the internet has a long memory, and unanswered questions don't simply disappear. As Meghan and Harry attempt to rebrand themselves outside the royal institution, that shadow of doubt follows them. Once trust is broken, repairing it is incredibly difficult. And in a world driven by perception, credibility may be the hardest thing to regain.